One day, James had to wait at the station till Edward and his train came in. This made him cross. Late again! Edward laughed and James fumed away. After James had finished his work, he went back to the yard and puffed onto the turntable. He was still feeling very bad-tempered.
Edward is impossible,
He grumbled to the others.
He clanks about like a lot of old iron, and he is so slow, he makes us wait.
Thomas and Percy were indignant. Old iron? Slow? Why, Edward could beat you in a race any day. Really, said James. I should like to see him do it. Next morning, James's driver was suddenly taken ill. He could hardly stand, so the fireman uncoupled James ready for shunting. James was impatient. Suddenly, the signalman shouted. There was James puffing away down the line. All traffic halted, called the signalman. Then he told the fireman what had happened. Two boys were on James's footplate fiddling with the controls. Phew! They tumbled off and ran when James started. The signalman answered the telephone. Yes? He's here. Right. I'll tell him. The inspector's coming at once. He wants a shunter's pole and a coil of wire rope. What for? Wondered the fireman. Search me, but you'd better get them quickly. The fireman was ready when Edward arrived. The inspector saw the pole and the rope. Good man, jump in. We'll catch him, puffed Edward. James was laughing. What a lark, what a lark, he chuckled to himself. Suddenly, he was going faster and faster. He realized that he had no driver. What shall I do? I can't stop. Help! Help! We're coming, called Edward. Edward was panting up behind with every ounce of steam he had. At last, he caught up with James. Steady, Edward, called his driver. The inspector stood on Edward's front, holding a noose of rope in the crook of the shunter's pole. He was trying to slip it over James's buffer. The engines swayed and lurched. At last, got him, he shouted. He pulled the noose tight. Gently braking, Edward's driver checked the engine speed, and James's fireman scrambled across and took control. So, the old iron caught you after all, chuckled Edward. I'm sorry, whispered James. Thank you for saving me. You were splendid, Edward. That's all right, replied Edward. The engines arrived at the station side by side. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting. A fine piece of work, he said. James, you can rest and then take your train. I'm proud of you, Edward. You shall go to the works and have your worn parts mended. Oh, thank you, sir, said Edward. It'll be lovely not to clank. Toby and Henrietta were enjoying their new job on the island of Sodor, but they do look old-fashioned and did need new paint. James was very rude whenever he saw them.
Yuck! What dirty objects, he would say.
At last, Toby lost patience. "James," he asked, "why are you red?"
I am a splendid engine, answered James, ready for anything. You never see my paint dirty.
"Oh," said Toby innocently, "that's why you once needed bootlaces, to be ready, I suppose."
James went redder than ever and snorted off. It was such an insult to be reminded of the time a bootlace had been used to mend a hole in his coaches.
At the end of the line, James left his coaches and got ready for his next train. It was a slow freight, stopping at every station to pick up and set down cars. James hated slow freight trains.
Dirty cars from dirty siding. Yeah!
Starting with only a few, he picked up more and more cars at each station till he had a long train. At first, the freight cars behaved well, but James bumped them so crossly that they were determined to get back at him. Presently, they approached the top of Gordon's Hill. Heavy freight trains halt here to set their brakes. James had had an accident with cars before and should have remembered this.
"Wait, James, wait,"
said the driver, but James wouldn't wait. He was too busy thinking what he would say to Toby when they next met. The freight car's chance had come. "Hurrah! Hurrah!" they laughed, and banging their buffers, they pushed him down the hill. "On! On!" yelled the cars.
"I've got to stop! I've got to stop!"
groaned James. Disaster lay ahead. Something sticky splashed all over James. He had run into 2 tar wagons and was black from smokebox to cab. He was more dirty than hurt. But the tar wagons and some cars were all to pieces. Toby and Percy were sent to help and came as quickly as they could. "Look here, Percy," exclaimed Toby. "Whatever is that dirty object? That's James, didn't you know?" "It's James's shape," said Toby. "But James is a splendid red engine, and you never see his paint dirty." James pretended he hadn't heard. Toby and Percy cleared away the unhurt cars and helped James home. Sir Topham Hatt met them.
"Well done, Percy and Toby."
He turned to James.
"Fancy letting your cars run away. I am surprised. You're not fit to be seen. You must be cleaned at once.
Toby shall have a new coat of paint."
"Please, sir, can Henrietta have one too?"
said Toby.
"Certainly, Toby." "Oh, thank you, sir. She will be pleased."
All James could do was watch Toby as he ran off happily with the news.
Do you know what? Asked Percy. What? Grunted Gordon. Do you know what? Silly, said Gordon. Of course I don't know what, if you don't tell me what is. Sir Topham Hatt says that the work in the yard is too heavy for me. He's getting a bigger engine to help me. Rubbish, said James. Any engine could do it. If you worked more and chattered less, this yard would be a sweeter, a better, and a happier place. Percy went off to fetch some coaches. That stupid old signal, he thought. He was remembering the time he'd misunderstood a signal and gone backwards instead of forwards. No one listens to me now. They think I'm a silly little engine and order me about. I'll show them. I'll show them. But he didn't know how. By the end of the afternoon, he felt tired and unhappy. He brought some coaches to the station. Hello, Percy, said Sir Topham Hatt. You look tired. Yes, sir, I am, sir. I don't know if I'm standing on my dome or on my wheels. You look the right way up to me, laughed Sir Topham Hatt. Cheer up. The new engine is bigger than you and can probably do the work alone. Would you like to help build my new harbor? Thomas and Toby will help too. Oh, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The new engine arrived. What's your name? Asked Sir Topham Hatt. Montague, sir, but I'm usually called Duck. They say I waddle. I don't really, sir, but I like Duck better than Montague. Good. Duck it shall be. Here, Percy, show Duck around. The two engines went off together. Soon they were very busy. James, Gordon, and Henry watched Duck quietly doing his work. He seems a simple sort of engine. We'll have some fun and order him about. Quack, 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 whoosh! Smoke billowed everywhere. Percy was cross, but Duck took no notice. They'll get tired of it soon. Do they tell you to do things, Percy? Yes, they do, answered Percy. Right, said Duck. We'll soon stop that nonsense. He whispered something. We'll do it later. Sir Topham Hatt was looking forward to hot buttered toast for tea at home. Suddenly he heard an extraordinary noise. Wheeze! Bother, he said, and hurried to the yard. Duck and Percy calmly sat on the switches outside the shed, refusing to let the engines in. Gordon, James, and Henry were furious. Stop that noise! Bellowed Sir Topham Hatt. They won't let us in, hissed Gordon. Duck, explain this behavior. Beg pardon, sir, but I'm a great Western engine. We do our work without fuss. But begging your pardon, sir, Percy and I would be glad if you would inform these engines that we only take orders from you. Quiet, said Sir Topham Hatt. Percy and Duck, I am pleased with your work today, but not with your behavior tonight. You have caused a disturbance. Gordon, Henry, and James sniggered. As for you, thundered Sir Topham Hatt, you've been worse. You made the disturbance. Duck is quite right. This is my railway, and I give the orders. After Percy went away, Duck was left to manage alone. He did so easily. One day, Thomas was at the junction when Gordon shuffled in with some freight cars. "Phew," remarked Thomas. "What a funny smell." "Can you smell a smell?" "I can't smell a smell," said Annie. "A funny, musty sort of smell," said Thomas.
No one noticed it till you did,
Grunted Gordon.
It must be yours.
Not long ago, he had fallen into a dirty ditch. Thomas enjoyed teasing him about it. "Annie, Clarabelle, do you know what I think it is? It's ditch water." Before Gordon could answer, Thomas puffed away. Annie and Clarabelle could hardly believe their ears. "He's dreadfully rude. I feel quite ashamed. I feel quite ashamed. He's dreadfully rude." And to Thomas they said, "You mustn't be rude. You make us ashamed." But Thomas didn't care a bit. "That was funny. That was funny," he chuckled. He felt very pleased with himself. Annie and Clarabelle were deeply shocked. They had great respect for Gordon, the big engine. Thomas left the coaches at the station and went off to a mine for some cars. Long ago, miners digging for lead had made tunnels under the ground. Their roofs are strong enough to hold up cars, but not the weight of engines. A large notice warns them not to enter the area. "Danger! Engines must not pass this board." Silly old board, thought Thomas. He had often tried to pass it, but had never succeeded. But this morning he had made a plan. The fireman went to throw the switch. "Now for my plan," thought Thomas. Bumping the cars fiercely, he jerked his driver off the footplate and followed them into the siding. "Come back!" yelled his driver. "Fire and smoke," said Thomas. "I'm sunk." And he was. "Oh dear," he said, "I am a silly engine." "And a very naughty one, too. I saw you," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Please get me out. I won't do it again." "I'm not sure. We can't lift you out with a crane. The ground's not firm enough." Let me see. I wonder if Gordon could pull you out." "Yes, sir," said Thomas, but he didn't want to meet Gordon just yet.
Down a mine, is he?
Laughed Gordon.
What a joke! Whoop, whoop. Little Thomas, we'll have you out in a couple of puffs.
Strong cables were fastened between the two engines.
Are you ready? Heave!
It was a lot harder than they all thought. At last, Thomas was free. "I'm sorry I was cheeky," said Thomas.
That's all right, Thomas. You made me laugh, replied Gordon. I'm in disgrace.
"So am I," said Thomas.
Why, so you are, Thomas. Shall we form an alliance? You help me and I'll help you.
"Right you are," agreed Thomas.
Good. That's settled, rumbled Gordon.
And buffer to buffer, the Allies puffed home. Thomas the Tank Engine was ill. Workmen had tried to make him better, but it was no use. "Edward must take you to the works," said Sir Topham Hatt. Thomas felt very miserable. Then Sir Topham Hatt spoke to Duck. "I want you to help Percy and Toby while Thomas is away." Duck was delighted. He already knew Percy and soon made friends with Toby and Bertie. Terence the tractor gave him a big welcome, too. "Take care of Thomas's coaches," he advised. "He's sure to miss them while he's away." Duck was very gentle with the coaches. Annie and Clarabelle were impressed. "Such nice manners," they told each other. "It really is a pleasure to go out with him." When Thomas came back, Annie and Clarabelle told him how well Duck had managed. Thomas was so pleased to be home that he soon forgot to be jealous. The works had left Thomas's handbrake very stiff. It made his brakes seem as if they were on, when in fact they were not. As a result, he and his coaches often overran the platform. Thomas found this most embarrassing. Gradually, his driver and firemen learned to be extra careful. But one day, Thomas's fireman was ill, and a relief man took his place. The fireman had fastened the coupling and joined the driver and station master on the platform to wait for Henry's passengers. The fireman had forgotten all about Thomas's handbrake. Thomas simmered happily. Not long now, he thought, as he saw Henry slowly approaching. But Thomas's brakes were not on. And suddenly, he felt his wheels begin to move. He tried to stop, but he couldn't, without his driver and fireman. He tried to whistle a warning, but he couldn't do that either. The conductor, driver, fireman, and passengers were all stranded on the platform. "Stop! Stop!" shrieked Annie and Clarabelle, but Thomas, with plenty of steam, kept on going. The alarm went down the line. "Stop the runaway!" There, ready for action, was Harold the helicopter. The inspector had made a plan, and together they took off into the sky. At last, Thomas was tiring. "I need to stop! I need to stop!" he panted wearily. As they neared the next station, Thomas saw Harold land. They entered the platform slowly enough for the inspector to act. Judging his moment, the inspector scrambled into the cab and screwed the brakes on. At last, Thomas stopped. Both he and the inspector were very relieved. Then they thanked Harold. "Think nothing of it. Glad to be of service, any time." "Thomas," remarked the inspector, "we must never let this happen again." Wearily, Thomas agreed with him. The engines were finding life difficult. Workmen were mending the viaduct on the main line. The arches needed strengthening. Sir Topham Hatt did not want to close the railway while the work was done, and so repairs took a long time. The engines had to take great care when crossing the viaduct, and the delay often made them late on their journey to the junction, where they knew Thomas would be ready to collect his passengers. Thomas grew crosser and crosser. "Time's time," he grumbled. "Why should I keep my passengers waiting while Henry and James dawdle about all day on viaducts?" "Don't blame me," snorted Henry. "If we hurried across the viaduct, it might collapse, and then you'd have no passengers at all. What would you do then?" "Run my train on time, for one thing," retorted Thomas. He hurried away before Henry could answer. Bertie was impatient too. He was timed to arrive just after Thomas. His passengers found that instead of going straight from the bus to their train, they were kept waiting till Thomas arrived. Soon Bertie grew cross with Thomas. "Late again," he remarked, as Thomas panted wearily in. "We may be friends, but I thought you could go fast, Thomas. It's time we had another race. I reckon I could beat you now." Thomas let off steam loudly. "Rubbish!" he hissed fiercely. "It's those main line engines. They dither about on the viaduct, and they blame Sir Topham Hatt's workmen. It's just an excuse for laziness, if you ask me." One day, James was later than ever at the junction. "I'm sorry, Thomas," he puffed. "I was held up at the station, and the viaduct made it worse." "It's lucky for you I'm a guaranteed connection," grumbled Thomas. Before James could answer, he puffed importantly away. Come along," he panted to the coaches. Annie and Clarabelle did their best, but Thomas soon found that he couldn't save much time. Suddenly, Thomas saw Bertie ahead. His radiator was steaming. "What's the matter?" asked Thomas. "You should be at the station by now. You're late." "I feel dreadful," moaned Bertie. "All upset inside, and driver says he can't make me better." "Thank goodness you're late, too. Can you take my passengers, please? They'll never get home otherwise." "Of course," agreed Thomas. He now felt sorry for Bertie and promised to get help at the next station. Thomas set off again. Already he felt much more cheerful, and Bertie's passengers, traveling in Annie and Clarabelle, all reached home safely. When Bertie was better, he came to thank Thomas. "I'm sorry I teased you about being late." "That's all right," replied Thomas. "I'm glad I could help. There are times when being late isn't such a bad thing after all." With a last cheerful greeting, the two friends went back to work. Henry and Gordon were lonely when Thomas left the yard to run his branch line. They missed him very much. They had more work to do and had to fetch their own coaches. The big engines thought they were too important to fetch coaches. James grumbled too. "We get no rest, we get no rest," they all complained. But the coaches only laughed. "You're lazy and slack, you're lazy and slack," they answered. Altogether, the engines were causing Sir Topham Hatt a great deal of trouble. The big stations at both ends of the line each have a turntable. Sir Topham Hatt had made them so that the tender engines can be turned round, because it is dangerous for them to go fast backwards. Little tank engines like Thomas don't need turntables. They can go just as well backwards as forwards. But to hear Gordon talk, you would have thought that Sir Topham Hatt had given him a tender just to show how important he was. "You don't understand, little Thomas. We tender engines have a position to keep up. It doesn't matter where you go, but we are important. And for Sir Topham Hatt to make us do shunting, fetch coaches, and go on some of those dirty sidings, it's not the proper thing." Thomas chuckled and went off with Annie and Clarabelle. "Disgraceful," Gordon hissed as he ran backwards to the turntable. The turntable was in a windy place close to the sea, and if he was not on it just right, he put it out of balance and made it difficult to turn. Today, Gordon was in a bad temper, and the wind was blowing fiercely. His driver tried to make him stop in the right place, but Gordon wasn't trying. The fireman tried to turn the handle, but Gordon's weight and the strong wind prevented him. "It's no good," they said at last. "Your big tender upsets the balance. If you were a little tank engine, you'd be all right. Now you'll have to pull the next train backwards." "Look," called some boys. "There's a new tank engine." "Oh, it's only Gordon back to front." "Hello," called Thomas. "Playing tank engines? Sensible engine. Take my advice. Scrap your tender and have a nice bunker." Gordon said nothing. Even James laughed when he saw him. "Take care," hissed Gordon. "You might stick too." "No fear," chuckled James. "I'm not so fat as you." I mustn't stick, thought James. He stopped on just the right place to balance the table. It could now swing easily. Gordon arrived in time to see everything. James turned much too easily. The wind puffed him round like a top. He couldn't stop. "Well, well," said Gordon. "Are you playing roundabouts?" Poor James, feeling quite giddy, rolled off to the shed without a word. That night, the three engines had an indignation meeting. "It's shameful to treat tender engines like this. Gordon has to go backwards, and people think he's a tank engine. James spins round like a top, and everyone laughs at us. And to add to that, Sir Topham Hatt makes us all shunt in dirty sidings. Ugh!" "Listen," said Gordon. He whispered something to the others. "We'll do it tomorrow. Sir Topham Hatt will look silly." The engines had decided to go on strike.
Percy worked hard at the new harbor. The workmen needed stone for their building. Toby helped, but sometimes the loads of stone were too heavy, and Percy had to fetch them for himself. Sometimes he'd see Thomas. "Well done, Percy. Sir Topham Hatt is very pleased with us." An airfield was close by. Percy heard the airplanes zooming overhead all day. The noisiest of all was a helicopter. "Silly thing," said Percy. "Why can't it go and buzz somewhere else?" One day, Percy stopped at the airfield. "Hello," said Percy. "Who are you?" "I'm Harold." "Who are you?" "I'm Percy. What whirly great arms you've got." "They're nice arms," said Harold. "I can hover like a bird. Don't you wish you could hover?" "Certainly not. I like my rails, thank you." "I think railways are slow," said Harold. "They're not much use and quite out of date." He whirled his arms and buzzed away. Percy found Toby at the quarry. "I say, Toby, that Harold, that stuck-up whirlybird thing, says I'm slow and out of date. Just let him wait. I'll show him." He collected his freight cars and started off, still fuming. Soon they heard a familiar buzzing. "Percy," whispered his driver. "There's Harold. He's not far ahead. Let's race him." "Yes, let's," said Percy. Percy pounded along. The cars screamed and swayed. "Well, I'll be a ding-dong-dang," said the driver. There was Harold. The race was on. "Go it, Percy," he yelled. "You're gaining." Percy had never been allowed to run fast before. He was having the time of his life. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," he panted to the cars. "We don't want to, we don't want to," they grumbled. It was no use. Percy was bucketing along with flying wheels, and Harold was high and alongside. The firemen shoveled for dear life. "Well done, Percy," shouted the driver. "We're gaining. We're going ahead. Oh, good boy, good boy." A distant signal warned them that the harbor wharf was near. "Beep, beep, beep. Brakes, conductor, please." The driver carefully checked the train's headlong speed. They rolled under the main line and halted on the wharf. "Oh, dear," groaned Percy. "I'm sure we've lost." The fireman scrambled to the cab roof. "We've won! We've won!" he shouted. "Harold's still hovering. He's looking for a place to land." "Listen, boys," the fireman called. "Here's a song for Percy." Said Harold the helicopter to our Percy, "You are slow. Your railway is out of date and not much use, you know. But Percy and his stone cars did the trip in record time, and we beat the helicopter on our old branch line." Percy loved it. "Oh, thank you," he said. He liked the last line best of all and was a very happy engine.
Thomas the Tank Engine was feeling bright and cheerful. It was a splendid day. "Good morning," he whistled to some cows, but the cows didn't reply. "Never mind," said Thomas. "They're busy with their breakfast." Next, he saw Bertie. "Hello, Bertie. Care for a race today?" But all Bertie could say was, "Ouch! That's another hole in the road." "I'm sorry, Bertie," smiled Thomas. Thomas was still in good spirits when Bertie arrived at the next station. "Bad luck, Bertie. Now, if you were a steam engine, you would run on a pair of reliable rails." "Huh," replied Bertie. "The railway was supposed to deliver tar to mend the road 2 weeks ago. You can't trust a thing that runs on rails." "I run on rails. You can trust me, Bertie. I'll see if I can find out what's happened." And Thomas puffed away towards the big station. James was snorting about in the yard. "It's too bad," he grumbled. "Percy goes to work at the harbor, and I do his job, here, there, and everywhere. Take that!" "Oh," groaned the freight cars, "just you wait. We'll show you." Gordon laughed. "I'll tell you what, James. If you pretended to be ill everywhere, you couldn't shunt freight cars here or go to the quarry there, could you?" "What a good idea," agreed James. "Look, here comes Thomas. I'll start pretending now." Thomas was sorry to see the engines looking miserable. "Cheer up," he puffed. "It's a beautiful day." "Yes," grumbled Gordon, "but not for James." "What's the matter?" asked Thomas. "He's sick," replied Gordon. "Yes, he is. I mean, I am," stuttered James. "I don't feel well at all." "Don't worry," said Thomas kindly. "I'll help out if you're ill." Gordon and James snickered quietly to each other. Some of James's cars were coupled behind Thomas, and he steamed away to the quarry. The cars were still cross. "We couldn't pay James back for bumping us, so we'll play tricks on Thomas instead. One engine is as good as another." But Thomas didn't hear them. He collected all the stone from the quarry and set off back to the junction. Danger lay ahead. "Now for our plan," giggled the cars. "Go faster, go faster." They pushed Thomas over the switches. "Slow down," called Thomas's driver and applied the brakes. Poor Thomas stood dazed and surprised in a muddy pond as a toad eyed him suspiciously. "Bust my buffers," muttered Thomas. "The day started so well, too." Duck pulled away the cars, and Edward helped Thomas back to the junction. Suddenly, Thomas remembered the missing tar. He told Edward all about it. "That's strange," said Edward. "A car full of tar has been left at my station. That must be it. Driver will make sure it gets to Bertie now." Later, James spoke to Thomas. "I'm sorry about your accident," he muttered, "and so is Gordon. We didn't mean to get you into trouble." "No, indeed," spluttered Gordon. "A mere misunderstanding, Thomas. All's well that ends well." Just then, Bertie arrived. He looked much more cheerful. "My road's being mended now." "Oh, I am glad," replied Thomas. "Thanks for all you did," added Bertie. "Now I know I can trust an engine, especially if his name is Thomas." Gordon and James puffed silently away to the shed, but Thomas still had company. "Well, well," he sighed, "what a day for surprises." The toad, who was looking forward to a ride home, noisily agreed.
Percy works in the yard at the big station. He loves playing jokes, but they can get him into trouble. One morning, he was very cheeky indeed. Beep, beep! Hurry up, Gordon. The train's ready. Gordon thought he was late. Ha 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 ha! Laughed Percy and showed him a train of dirty coal cars. Gordon thought how to get back at Percy for teasing him. Next, it was James's turn. Stay in the shed today, James. Sir Topham Hatt will come and see you. Ah, thought James, Sir Topham Hatt knows I'm a fine engine. He wants me to pull a special train. James's driver and fireman could not make him move. The other engines grumbled dreadfully. They had to do James's work as well as their own. At last, the inspector arrived. Show a wheel, James. You can't stay here all day. Sir Topham Hatt told me to stay here. He sent a message this morning. He did not. How could he? He's away for a week. Oh, said James. Oh, where's Percy? Percy had wisely disappeared. When Sir Topham Hatt came back, he was cross with James and Percy for causing so much trouble. But the very next day, Percy was still being cheeky. I say, you engines, I'm to take some freight cars to Thomas's Junction. Sir Topham Hatt chose me especially. He must know I'm a really useful engine. More likely he wants you out of the way, grunted James. Gordon looked across to James. They were going to play a trick on Percy. James and I were just speaking about signals at the junction. We can't be too careful about signals, but then I needn't say that to a really useful engine like you, Percy. Percy felt flattered. We had spoken of backing signals, put in James. They need extra special care, you know. Would you like me to explain? No, thank you, James, said Percy. I know all about signals. Percy was a little worried. I wonder what backing signals are, he thought. Never mind, I'll manage. He puffed crossly to his freight cars and felt better. He came to a signal. Bother! It's a danger. The signal moved to show line clear. Its arm moved up instead of down. Percy had never seen that sort of signal before. Down means go, and up means stop. So upper still must mean go back. I know, it's one of those backing signals. Come on, Percy, said his driver. Off we go. Stop! You're going the wrong way. But it's a backing signal, Percy protested and told him about Gordon and James. The driver laughed and explained. Oh, dear, said Percy. Let's start quickly before they see us. He was too late. Gordon saw everything. That night, the big engines talked about signals. They thought the subject was funny. Percy thought they were being very silly.